Hey there, Golfcast Nation. This is episode 2 of Whiskey High IQ, and we're going to get ready to define what a tasting is, because next week we're going to taste together and we're going to focus in on bourbons. What makes a bourbon? Well, the rules are simple. It has to be made in America. That's a geographical thing. It has to be 51% corn as the main part of the mash. So again, it's a corn-based product, and it also has to be aged for at least 2 years in a brand new oak barrel, right? It's white oak. So those are the rules. That would be charred, and how much that char is depends on what the manufacturer wants to do, what notes they want to pull out of it. But those are kind of the main three things that make up a bourbon. It has to be corn-based, has to be aged 2 years in an oak barrel, and what was the other one? Oh, made in the United States geographically. There are some other rules we'll go through in a deeper segment, but that gives you an understanding of bourbon, because remember, all bourbons are whiskey, but not all whiskeys are a bourbon. Kind of a general slogan there to kind of weed you through some of the chicanery of the whiskey world. So next week, we're going to go ahead and start by bringing in these 3 whiskeys that we're going to taste. I wanted to give you, as a beginner, a really good kind of flight to really start to enjoy the whiskey flavors and what it takes. So we're going to start with Evan Williams Black. Again, I found all these at my local ABC. I went to a couple different ones and they were all on the shelf, so I would say easier whiskeys to find. So Evan Williams Black label, it's about an 86 proof, give or take, so somewhere in the 80s. Really good starter bourbon. You're looking at the $20 range for a 750 milliliter bottle. So again, lower end. Maker's Mark, which is a wheated bourbon. So wheated bourbon means that there is at least 51% of it is corn, and then the next highest grain in the mash would be wheat. What do we know about wheat? It's going to give you the soft, delicate flavors. We'll talk about that more. And then that's going to be right around 90 proof, and then we're going to go Wild Turkey 101, which is a bourbon, but they call it a high-rye. So the second grain inside of it would be a higher rye, so you're going to start to get some of that peppery, baking spices notes to it. So again, this will give you 3 wonderful bourbons. We'll span the gap from 80s to 100 inside of proof, and also different flavors from wheated to a regular bourbon to kind of that, spicier high rye bourbon. And again, Wild Turkey 101 is going to be mid-20s. Maker Mark's probably the most expensive. You're at $750, you're probably looking in the $40 range. But again, this gives you kind of some entry levels to start thinking about what the different tastes and what that would be. So we're going to put these aside. I encourage you by next week to purchase those if you can, and we'll do a tasting with that. So now let's go through what does a tasting look like if you've never done a tasting. I went ahead and got me a Buffalo Trace. I was going to use this instead of Evan Williams, but the beauty of Evan Williams is really easy to find. Buffalo Trace, people get a little bit crazy on these and they can be hard to track down, so I went ahead and did the Evan Williams just to try to make things easier to find. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll have a pour inside of our glass. What kind of glass should I use is the first question. Ideally, a Glencairn or a tulip shape, where you have a wide fishbowl at the bottom, kind of a stovetop pipe on top, and that will take the aromas from the fishbowl and kind of feed them up, makes nosing a little bit easier. So the first thing we want to do is we want to swirl the glass. I'm one of the world's worst swirlers, but there we go. The reason we want to swirl that is we want to get some oxidization in there, and we want to start releasing aromas. But more so, what that does is create something called legs. So if you see here, you can see there's some thin lines of liquid going back down the side of the glass back into the fishbowl. We did a whole segment on legs. I encourage you to go watch that podcast. But what legs gives you is kind of the viscosity of the whiskey. Is it thin? If you have thin legs running fast, that means it's a lower proof usually. And if you get wider legs moving slow, it means a higher proof. So again, you can start to proof and you can start to get a thickness of the whiskey, right? By 80 proof, which Buffalo Trace, I think is 90. So as you get into the lower proofs, they're going to add water to the bottle, and thus bring down the actual proofing of the whiskey, which will thin the whiskey out, and that's why the legs will change. So we always kind of start with a swirl, get the aromas going, kind of look at legs, and then we go right into nosing, right? When we nose a whiskey, there's two different ways that we can do it. We can do it a distance game. How close can I get that whiskey to my nose and get a sip and take a big sniff, and can I get the aromas? Can I start pulling out notes from it? One thing we don't want to do, especially in a high spirit whiskey, is put our nose all the way in with our mouth shut. We take a deep breath. That ethanol and the smells inside of the whiskey will blow up your olfactory, and you just won't be able to sniff very well from that point forward. There's a couple recovery ways that in the future we'll tell you about. You can sniff coffee beans, a couple other ways to try to bring your olfactory back. But the best way to do it is don't blow up your olfactory senses, right? So what I like to do is I like to put my nose all the way in where the top of the brim of the cup touches my nose, but I leave my mouth open. So I breathe in through my nose and I exhale through my mouth, and that will protect the olfactory. And I think the beauty part of that is it really primes the tasting, because you're starting to get some of that coating inside of your mouth, and you're gonna start bringing up some tasting notes that way. So without further ado, let's nose some Buffalo Trace. So what do we know about Buffalo Trace? If you've never had Buffalo Trace before, it's very sweet. Lots of caramel. I'm getting vanilla notes, maybe a little bit of fruit in the background, but again, I'm getting traditional bourbon. When I think of corn, I think of sugar, I think of sweet. This is the essence of that. We will get some oak. It is aged. I won't give you the exact Buffalo Trace aging statements, but it's in the barrel for a little bit. So you're gonna start picking up some of that note. You're getting vanilla, which again is one of my favorites, like sugar, vanilla, a little bit of oak. That is classic American bourbon, and Buffalo Trace gives you all that. So by nosing, you're gonna start pulling this out. Why is nosing important? A fun game. Try this even with any whiskey or any spirit you drink. Hold your nose, take a sip. Without your olfactory, it really doesn't have much flavor. It doesn't taste like much, but as soon as you open up your nose, those flavors jump out. I've seen anywhere from 80 to 85% of all taste actually comes from smell. So that's why nosing it is really important. Once we've nosed it, now we're gonna go into taste. Taste has two main components, primer and real taste. Primer just kind of takes a high spirited alcohol, puts it in your mouth, allows things to wake up, and you're gonna taste it. We're not really gonna look for much in the primer sip. We're just trying to get everything kind of up and running. The second sip is where we'll start to try to pull out notes. By the nose, what did I get? I got sugar, I got vanilla, I got a little bit of oak, maybe a little fruit dancing around in the background. So now when I take my second sip, hopefully some of those flavors will jump forward, and maybe others. So, cheers, Solancha. So, what do I get? I definitely get some alcohol burn. We're looking at 90 proof. I like it. So I'm getting a little hug. It's not punchy. It's actually a very smooth, approachable whiskey, but there's a little bit of fight going on in there, so there's a little bit of alcohol. We're looking again at 90 proof, 45% alcohol. Getting tons of sugar, caramel. I love that. I'm more of a toffee guy. I like more of a charred in the barrel longer, get more of a toffee, burnt, sugary note is my favorite. But again, this is what I would expect for a good bourbon. Good sugar, lots of vanilla, a little bit of oak dancing around. And then, like I said, I do get a little bit of fruit note kind of dancing, kind of dark fruits, kind of cherries, those kind of dancing around in the background. But a really, really good whiskey. Again, for a bourbon experience, if you've never had Buffalo Trace neat, I really encourage you to go try it, because it is a great starter whiskey. Affordable, really tasty, and again, hard to find, unfortunately. However, really good whiskey to kind of get an understanding of what the American bourbon feels like. And then the final thing we need to do is we need to look at finish, right? So now we have taste, we pulled out notes with our nose, we pulled out with taste. Now what does the finish feel like? When we talk finish, it's usually short, medium, or long, and then we say dry or oily. So dry, your mouth will actually dry out. Oily, you'll get this resin or this coating over your tongue, and it just kind of sits there. So depending on how long it's in the barrel, depending on how much water has been added to the system, and other factors can really affect what this finish feels like. So it's okay to be short, medium, long. It's okay to be oily. It's okay to be dry, but we want to kind of designate what that is. And as a whiskey drinker, you're going to find a preference. For me, I like medium long and I like oily. I don't like a lot of cottonmouth dry, but it doesn't stop me from drinking a good whiskey. But again, my favor would be towards a medium to long finish, and it would kind of sit a little bit wetter in the mouth over time. And if you're asking why I double tap is a old Irish tradition. If you double tap your whiskey, that means the evil spirits will leave your glass and make your whiskey taste much better. So that's why I always double tap. No, I'm not OCD compulsive. It's just what we do here inside of Golf Cast. So let's go ahead and do our finish. I would say finish is probably medium, and I'm getting a little bit of dry mouth. I do get the sugars, I do get that vanilla, I get a little bit of oak again, so that holds up all the way throughout the tasting, which is awesome. So all the layers kind of flow through the whole tasting, but I do kind of get a dry mouth, right? A little drier finish. So this finish to me would be kind of medium to medium short and a little bit dry. Again, not a negative, it's just what it is, right? My preference would be a little different, but again, for 28 bucks, buying a bottle of Buffalo Trace, this is a really, really good introduction whiskey for you to start to understand what the bourbon, what the American bourbon tastes like. So if you get a shot, go out there and buy a sample. I think my sample was like $3. Again, we have Evan Williams, Maker's Mart, and Wild Turkey jumping into our next episode. We're going to kind of go through the tastings kind of like we just did and go through those three and see if you as the home consumer can actually go through and taste with me and see if I can start pulling out some of the notes that I'm talking about. You might have more notes. I would say for me, I'm an average taster. I have a good palate, but it's not great. My wife blows me out of the water. A couple friends of mine, much better at tasting than I am. But again, the beauty of it is it doesn't matter. Do I find joy in the actual whiskey? What notes do I like? What notes do I find? And what does that look like? And also, we're going to talk about our ranking system inside of Golf Cast. We rank everything between 1 to 5. So we rank the nose, we rank the taste, we rank the finish, and we rank it overall. So hopefully, as we grow as a membership and inside of a group, you can start to go find other whiskey drinkers that are similar to you and go find what they like. And we're creating a recommender system for you coming shortly. So here's to a great tasting. Here's to what a tasting looks like. Next week, come join me. We're going to go through 3. Evan Williams Black, Maker's Mart, Wild Turkey 101. Until then, Cilantro, cheers, adios. And you tap at the end, that tells you your bartender or the staff that you really enjoyed the whiskey as well. Buffalo Trace, man, this is a solid 3, 3.5. Budget bourbon, it's through the roof. I only have one budget bourbon that I like better than that, and we'll talk about that next episode. So thank you so much, and we enjoyed this, and we'll see you next week when we actually go into our tasting and start pulling out what the standard notes are for bourbons, high ryes, and high wheats. Thank you so much.